Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children. So I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the OT is In. Today, we're going to dive deep into the realm of social and emotional learning. What a hot topic! Our esteemed guest, Elizabeth Sautter, is an expert in supporting parents of neurodivergent children. Elizabeth brings a wealth of knowledge and practical strategies to the forefront. With her background as a speech pathologist and her personal experience as a parent of neurodivergent kids, she highlights how integrating social emotional learning into daily routines can significantly ease the pressures and stresses faced by families. Today, she'll share insights from her books and her resources, touching upon the important connection between emotional regulation and interoception, the internal sense that helps us understand and feel what's going on inside of our bodies. Through thoughtful discussion and helpful acronyms like PACE, which guys, this was eye-opening even to me, Elizabeth aims to empower parents to seamlessly incorporate these practices throughout their day. So prepare to be enlightened on how everyday moments can be transformed into opportunities for growth. So let's get started. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. I have with me today my friend Elizabeth Sautter, who, do you know what, we met several years ago. Actually, I wrote an article for the zones of regulation on how to integrate that into the homeschool day. And she is working or was working familiar with them, right? And so we kind of met through that. And then a few years later, after we even had been talking, I was looking down at this resource I often recommend to families. And I was like, hey, Elizabeth, I know her. We chat all the time. So it just made me laugh how they were the same person and I didn't actually even recognize that. But today we want to talk a lot about social emotional learning and what that means. So before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're from and all that good stuff?
I'd love to. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I still do work for the zones. It's one of the hats I wear. But on my passion side project purpose in life is to support parents of neurodivergent kids with social emotional learning. So I got to that path as a speech pathologist and focusing on social communication. I used to have a multidisciplinary center where we had OTs and speech and executive functioning and social and all the fun stuff. And Leah Kuipers, who wrote the zones, was one of the people who worked there. So we collaborate together still. But I was just really passionate about the parents in the waiting room and then myself, because I wear the hat of a parent of neurodivergent kids myself. I grew up in a household where my sister was developmentally delayed. And I think there's so much on our plates as parents of neurodivergent kids and, stress and pressure. And there's a lot of guidance for teachers and educators at school and training that we get as therapists, but not so much for the parents. There's no guidebook, there's no handbook. So I had my kids in therapy and they would come home with like book recommendations and handouts to work on and things like that. And I would felt so guilty because I wasn't doing them all the time. So I realized that there's so much that we can do through everyday routines and activities. And so that's what I put together in my resources, book, course, all the things to support parents of neurodivergent kids just like me, realizing that everyday natural routines and activities can infuse social emotional learning.
Love that, because I can't tell you how many times that parents will come to me and they're like, "Well, can you help me prioritize? Because I feel like I have 9 million things to do every day, and I just can't make it all happen." Right. So you've really worked in how to do this throughout your day. So this month we're really focusing a lot on interoception here, and you're talking about social emotional learning. Can we just define like how are those two related?
Yeah. So I will say that, in the field of speech pathology, we were taught as like a medical model
Hmm.
and deficits and disorders and, sort of fixing and goals and, to the neuromajority.
Hmm.
As I have developed, and expanded my knowledge and through other experiences, I really have honed in on not more of the top down approach in terms of building social skills and conformance and compliance to the thinking of others kind of thing, more of the bottom up approach to social emotional learning. Because and what I mean by the bottom up approach is getting the brain engaged, being regulated, understanding emotions and yourself and others, the situation around you, and then you can start thinking about building what else is needed. So with that bottom up approach, one of the bottom pieces is interoception.
Hmm.
Because what we know about interoception is it's that way it allows us to interpret and understand the internal signals and sensations and energy that's happening in our body, and then know how to connect that with a need, like, if you have a pit in your stomach, is that need to, oh, I'm super hungry. That's growling pit in my stomach. Or, ooh, I gotta go to the bathroom right now. Or I'm really feeling anxious. Like those butterflies, either they're excited butterflies, or that's another piece of it too. Or they're like, I don't feel comfortable right now.
Right.
That's super confusing. And that's all of the body signals. That's what's happening when we get those sensory processing, interoceptive awareness. And as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, as there's hypersensitive senses that we have and hyposensitive, meaning that we're hypersensitive to maybe those signals, maybe that pit in your stomach is just like super painful and just overwhelming. You can't think of anything else, or you don't ever feel that pit in your stomach. So you might be incontinent, or you forget to eat, or you misread social cues because you don't understand what that anxiety is inside.
Right.
And so that is how it's related, because if you cannot identify those feelings, those sensations, that interoceptive awareness, the information that we're getting in from our environment, interpreting it internally, then you're going to miss the cues, whether those are social cues, whether they're emotional cues in yourself and others, or also regulation, things that you need to actually do, self-care.
Hmm.
So, peeing your pants is not really socially pro like, yeah. Or, missing the cues also for like taking care of yourself with hunger, because then your brain is not engaged and you can't think and navigate situations and
And we get
execute.
hangry.
For sure, right? And you just, how did I get hangry? How did that happen? Well, you missed the cue to, figure out that that pit in your stomach was hunger.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by the bottom up approach, interoceptive awareness being the first, that bottom, that noticing, that awareness, and then building from there on understanding emotions and then understanding situations and social and how to navigate that.
So you said within your book and your resources, you kind of help parents to do this throughout the day, right? So can you give us an example of what that would be like?
Yeah, well, so there's, I mean, a lot that I do on teaching interoceptive awareness and managing emotions as the bottom up approach. And you can sprinkle that in anywhere you go, realistically. But I have divided the book into home, community, holidays, and special events, and bridging home and school, because that's just what we're doing. And so it's like kind of
Right.
like to make it super simple, like, okay, I'm in the kitchen. What can I do? And then I do have a grid that's like, okay, emotional awareness. And then you go to those pages to like figure out different activities. But I have an acronym that I can share in terms of, I love acronyms. They help me remember things.
Me too.
It's PACE. So pausing, practicing all kinds of things around pausing throughout the day. You can do that through playing games like, freeze dance or red light, green light,
Mhm.
or just pausing. Hey, let's just sit here for a minute. One of my things that I do for pausing is when I put my hands on the wheel, I just take a deep breath to pause. And also when I put my hands on a knob of a door, I try to
Yeah.
pause as well. So just practicing that ability to pause throughout the day.
I love that you have a tangible cue to even remind yourself, because
Yep.
even us as adults, how often am I not doing that and recognizing myself and where I am throughout the day? Ooh, that's so good.
And then becoming attuned, so noticing, and that's that mindfulness piece, because the research shows that what helps to build interoceptive awareness is through mindfulness.
Mhm.
So that attunement to things around you internally, so you can do the five senses. It's all throughout my book in different places, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. But that's sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. So at the dinner table, you can take a mindful moment and pause and smell the mashed potatoes. You see how it feels in your mouth, or crunch the broccoli or chicken or whatever it might be, and just see how that feels in your mouth and smells. You can take a mindful moment and look outside at the leaves blowing. You can say, "Oh, let's put on some music and just listen to the drums."
Yeah,
I take a mindful walk where you're feeling your feet on the ground. Those are all mindful moments.
yeah,
And then at nighttime too, there's so many different activities that you can do. I mean, these are in the car too. You could, listen to music in the car
right.
and take a mindful moment about listening to that one instrument. At nighttime, put a book on your belly and watch it go up and down, or a stuffed animal. There's all these different ways that you can tune into the five senses during your day. So there's
Yeah,
just
I
a lot
love
of
this,
suggestions.
especially as homeschool families, because we can do this at any moment in time and really recognize, like, what is an impact for you when we are doing math? What's the difference in your body when we are eating lunch? What's the difference in how you're feeling and what's going on, what you hear, you smell, you see when we are doing things as a family or in a group? This can really be, especially that A or that attunement can happen at any point at any time.
Yeah, and I think that it's also important to it can happen any time of the day, any activity, and I think it's really good. I've learned a lot from the occupational therapist Kelly Mahler, and she calls it, instead of like waiting, till there's a reactive time to need a break, let's take
Mhm.
some feel good breaks throughout the day.
Yeah,
So, like, to having these feel good breaks to be attuned and to be mindful and follow your child's interests too. Like if they don't really love to listen to music, then that wouldn't be the thing. Or if,
right.
looking outside at the rain makes them sad or something, then that wouldn't be the thing. But if it is like playing with Play-Doh and feeling
Mhm.
the texture on your fingers, or like maybe they like the smell of oranges instead of mashed potatoes.
Yeah,
Follow what they're interested in and what, lights them up. So definitely attuning to their interests and attuning to the senses around them.
yeah. Oh, great. So what is C?
C is doing check-ins.
Okay.
So checking in and just doing that temperature check. And you can do that through a body scan, which is a little bit more formal and takes a little bit of time, but it can be really helpful to teach kids how to scan their body for the different sensations, signals, and energy that they might be having from toe to head or head to toe, and just see if they can sense any more tension in their throat or tingling in their belly or coldness in their hands or warmth in their feet, to see if they can just be more attuned to the sensations and signals, and then label them with the different potential emotions and become aware of how they're feeling. And you can use, different meters or a scale of 1 to 5 for how they might be feeling when you're doing that body scan. The intensity of it can be really helpful to have those visual cues.
So we, a few years ago, drew, like, had my kids lay down and we drew their whole bodies.
Yes.
And, we talked about, we did it as part of our anatomy, so we were like, where's the stomach, you think? Where's the heart, you think? But that's an important piece when we're talking about the, check-ins in your body scan, is knowing, like, how do you label this body part? Maybe
Yep.
my stomach has those butterflies, but if you don't know where the stomach is, that's really
Yeah.
not that helpful. So that's a, when we're pulling together all of these different parts of curriculums and, right, learning throughout our day, you can build all that in together.
I was just gonna say that. That's why I feel like my work is so, like, in synergy with the homeschooling community, because it's like you're doing these things all day, every day, and it's just really a mindset shift.
Mhm.
Just realizing that what you're doing is all part of real social emotional learning, and I could say social emotional, like, well-being and
Yeah,
executive functioning is part of that too. It's all life skills.
yeah,
And it's just focused on, emotions and executing tasks and navigating social situations. But it's everything that we're doing all day long. And if you have that lens on and that mindset, then you just sort of adapt and infuse, and I call it sprinkle in what you're
Mhm.
doing. I mean, there's so many things. I could go on and on about kitchen activities and art activities, but that's how the book is outlined. There's a page on doing art with your kids, having a talent show, and planning a meal and at the table, at the grocery store. It's
Oh,
so
it
much.
sounds so perfect for homeschooling communities.
Yes, it is. It's
You
like the
are
handbook.
right. Perfect. Is your child constantly fearful or disruptive, or do they crave routine or seem overly sensitive? It might be time to consider the world of sensory processing. This world, it's confusing and it can be hard to pin down. But you are the best advocate for your child, and I know you're determined to be equipped with knowledge to help support your child. After all, you are here listening to the OT is in podcast. But there is more than this one sense, and I know you want more than anything for your child to experience peace and confidence so that they can thrive. The Sensory Balanced Focus Group combines the best of both worlds, the latest research and insights into sensory processing with tips, tools, and strategies to implement straight away into your homeschool, plus a community to work through it with. I hope you'll join the Sensory Balanced Homeschool Focus Group today. You can find it in the shop at homeschoolot.com, or more specifically, homeschoolot.com/shop/sensory-focus-group. Now, back to the show. So, what is E?
So that is evaluate. So evaluate how you are feeling once you're able to pause, attune, and check in. So evaluate what's needed and what's next. So if it is like, oh, I do have a pit in my stomach. Actually, yeah, my bladder's full. Like, after they learn what bladder is, then they say, I need to go to the bathroom. That's why I've been so uncomfortable and grouchy. And I just was, on my tablet, so I didn't want to get up, but I'm feeling uncomfortable right now, or that's, why I'm feeling a little bit of butterflies right now and anxious. And that's, just learning all of those vocabulary words is part of that too, but evaluate what to do.
Yeah, and that's how you relate it to the action. And I think that's so great, and how empowering that is for our kids when we're like, okay, now we've kind of gone through and you're able to label, you're telling me what's going on. So what do we do?
Yeah.
My husband, we kind of joke around it all the time because he'll tell my kids, like, if you're stating a problem without a solution, all you're doing is complaining. And we joke about that all the time. But he says, and he will acknowledge with them, sometimes when you're stating that problem, your solution is, I need you to hear me.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's not that, I have to do something to fix it. But if all I want you to do is listen, then I need to let you know that, yep, I'm going to say this and I need you to listen. Or it's, I'm nervous and can I have a hug? Or it's, I have a pit in my stomach and I actually have to go to the bathroom, right? So you're tying it into what can we actually do in the situation and giving that to our kids. So great.
One thing that some of the parents that I coach and my kids themselves, I often say, like, do you want to problem solve or process?
Good.
Yeah, it's just, it's different. I just need to process right now. Do not help me problem solve. I just need to dump. But I think that when you're talking about, like, solution based, and we'll go back to social emotional learning, it's because, like, so this is where we might not realize that a child or a person in the world, an individual, struggles to make sense of this information. And
Mhm.
that information includes emotions. So that pit in your stomach could be, anxiety. It could also be, like, being able to read a room of, like, you walk in and everybody's quiet and, like, and they can't sense that something is not right.
Mhm.
And then they're like, hey, everybody, how's it going? I brought some donuts or whatever. And
Mhm.
like, does this person not see that something's going on? But they
Right.
might have sensitivity to reading the room, to reading the emotions of others and also in themselves. And so then it's just, it goes from like 0 to 100 or things like that, because they're not feeling what it feels like to build that, be aware and be building that interoceptive awareness to know that they're starting to feel anxious. And then all of a sudden
Yeah.
there's a explosion.
Right. And a lot of emotion can be really confusing. Like, what's the difference between feeling anxious and feeling excited, like they can really go hand in hand
Oh my
and
gosh.
can actually occur at the same time. You know, like I can be really excited about something, but also really anxious. So being able to determine that. So is that, identifying emotion and explaining it, is that included within your books?
We do a lot of things around identifying emotions, and I start out with a lot of external identification of emotions, like because it can be really challenging to
Mhm.
know how you're feeling for yourself. So
Yeah.
we do a lot of like following their interest and characters that they might really enjoy in books, picture books, or graphic novels, or in movies. You can pause and identify facial expressions and emotions, and then figure out like what's going on, what the situation. It's a lot of also situational awareness and pausing. That's a lot in my book too, is like pausing and figuring out what's going on around you, becoming aware and noticing the situation, the people, the objects, the different things, so that then you can sort of, that helps to identify that this is a birthday party, and I'm excited, and I could be a little bit anxious, but it's like a
Yeah.
pleasant feeling,
Yeah.
versus like, what was that loud noise, and figuring out, like, I heard something. So then realizing that situation is that there might be some scary situation around me. So I am feeling uncomfortable.
Right. Well, you're speaking to my homeschooling heart here about, we use literature so much
Right.
throughout our days. And I love how you mentioned, analyzing or thinking about book characters. And they're also considering the setting in there and how their emotions are. A lot of times it's easier to identify and to point out, struggles within somebody else versus with ourselves. So it
Yeah.
kind of gives that option. Oh, how do you think, Brian's feeling in Hatchet? Or how do you think, whoever the biggest or most recent book that you read, and then bring it into yourself. Have you ever felt that way? Or have you
Mhm.
ever been in that situation? Mm.
Yep. And you can even like, you can take it from the book and characters in movies, Pixar little
Mhm.
YouTube clips, to play as
Yeah.
well, if it's not quite ready to come back to the self. But that can just be really, because it's vulnerable to talk about your own emotion.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
sometimes if you don't know, then it can be challenging, but it's easier to maybe see in a picture or a movie. And then it could be fun to play it out with objects or characters or even people role playing.
Right, right.
The
Oh, so
person.
great. So great. So thank you so much. You have given us, some tools to even start now with, the PACE acronym, and then also some resources. But tell me the titles and where we can find your books, and then where we can find you.
Yeah. So first I'll start with where you can find me is elizabethsautter.com. And then I have on there a lot of different resources. I have some freebies. How to help your child morning, noon, and night is on my homepage. Or I'm moving things around, so hopefully it'll still be on my homepage. But I have a bunch of freebies that you can grab. And then I do share information in newsletters. And I have workshops that I have on executive functioning and social and emotional. And then my main, what we were talking about mostly, is this make social emotional learning stick, practical activities to help your child manage emotions, navigate social situations, and reduce anxiety.
So
So
good.
that's the one that's divided up. It's like a activity book. That's what I mean by a manual. It's divided up into home, community, holidays, special events, and bridging home and school. That's the second edition. I added the bridging home and school because that's relevant for a lot of people, not the
Right.
whole population, but it's so important to not, they have to connect. We have to talk to each other. But it's just, you can see how there are different activities. If you're not
Yes.
at the screen, you can see that there are just, here's in the kitchen and it says service with a smile, and it's just different activities, or surprise snack. And there's just different activities that relate to social emotional learning. And then the other one that I just released a few months ago is with a coloring book as well, but this is a family journal, and it's simple ways to make mindfulness and gratitude stick.
Mm.
And it's just going through the five senses and being mindful each day. You could do this at dinner or at nighttime. Notice someone who helped you or supported you today. How do you feel about them? And I'm grateful for that person, and writing that in there. And then that's related to person, but I have sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell.
Yeah. Well, that for my family would be a really good morning time activity. So we are kind of in a collection or a collective all together first thing in the morning, all my kids and I. And what a really cool thing to do together, and kind of a keepsake as well when that's
Yeah,
all done.
I know. I mean, nice to read it back too. It's kind of like a gratitude jar where you put it in, but then you can reflect back on it and benefit two times.
Yeah,
Times, however many times you go back. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. My son and I were thinking about writing a journal. He's 17 now, but he wants to write another journal because we wrote one on growth mindset a while ago. And he was reading some of his journals because he was like reflecting back on what he liked and didn't like. And he was just cracking up with the things he was saying. It's so fun to have those memory books to go
yeah,
back. And it's meant to be connected. Like, we know so much about social emotional learning starts with us and our connection with our kids. So that's why I made this journal. So to just my audience said, I want activities, tell me
yeah.
what to do and how to do it. So here you go. And then I have a coloring book too, that's like side by side coloring together and around all the things you're grateful for.
I love this. So many good opportunities for us. You're right. Throughout the day, morning, noon, and night, right?
Yep.
So great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
That was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the OT is In podcast. For episodes 13 through 16, we've been discussing a lesser known sense, interoception. But some would say that it's actually the most important sense. It's the foundation for self-awareness. It's the ability to identify, access, understand, and respond to the patterns of our internal signals. And understanding this sense is also the basis for communicating about our emotions and our needs. To help start the conversation with your kids, I've created a really simple question guide, even with some hints for Gestalt language processors. So click on the show notes and it'll pop up for you. Thank you for being here. It's not lost on me that there are many places that you can spend your time, yet you're choosing to be here with me, Sarah Collins, from the Homeschool OT. I'll see you next week.